going. Okay, right. Hello and welcome back to another video. So this week we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to be doing a portfolio review. So Mateus Ferreira, apologies if I'm mispronouncing that, but Bonza Kitten on the Real-Time VFX Discord reached out and asked if I would do a portfolio review for of their portfolio. So we're going to watch it through, get a feel for the kind of work that they've done, how the portfolio kind of is presented. We're going to have some sort of general comments about how best to present your work, and then we're going to go through sort of fine-tooth comb through every single effect and kind of like pick up on little bits that can be polished here and there. We're kind of looking for low-hanging fruit here, so little bits of things that are going to make a quick change, but also make a big impact in the quality. That's the plan. Okay, so let's get started. So I'm just going to full screen this. I'm just going to let it play. And I will say there's good work here. We're going to be quite critical. The idea obviously for this is to improve, and sort of take that work and kind of polish it. And a lot of the time you do need external eyes to tell you what's good and what's not good and what could be improved. And it's very easy to get caught up in the making of the work and not thinking so much about the presentation. It's very easy to sort of not conflagrate, what's the word, to sort of feel like because something has taken a long time and was difficult to work on, it then becomes a really good piece, and so you don't want to kind of cut something that you spent a lot of time working on. So the amount of effort you've put in, sometimes something really quick can be very high quality, and you kind of need someone else's eyes and someone else's opinions to sort of help with that, just because it's very difficult to separate your own work and your own kind of involvement from your own work. So yeah, as I say, some nice work in here. Again, we're going to be quite critical and fine-tooth comb through things, but hopefully it's all constructive. Just while we're watching this, just thinking about your own kind of ideas. Do you think this is good work? Do you think it's bad work? Is there some improvements that you would sort of suggest? How would you treat this this portfolio if you received it? There we are. Cool. So before I play it again and do anything to it, first thing I'm going to do is mute it. Now, for the 2 minutes that we watched that together, it's quite nice having a bit of background music, but I would 100% advise not having music or sound on your portfolio. If you're a VFX artist, you're not a sound developer, or not a sound audio engineer, you're not going to have a really good ear for audio. There's some quite nice elements to that where the sound is sort of keyed in with what's happening on the screen, but all that does is it eats into your time. It takes time to set that up, it takes time to polish that. If you now cut one of your pieces out of the portfolio, it's going to be wrong, the sound is going to be all messed up. It's just not worth the bother. It's really nice to have it, of course it is, but if I'm the person reviewing this, and I've watched this multiple times, the very first thing I did was turn off the music. It gets repetitive, it interferes with anything else I'm listening to, it's just not worth the time. I'll be brutally honest, just don't do it. At least this is my opinion, and like I will caveat, all of this stuff is just my opinion. I've been doing this a long time, but other opinions will differ. Stuff that I like, other people might not. Stuff that other people don't like, I might think is really, really good. So as with all of this stuff, take everything with a pinch of salt whenever you receive advice. But yeah, first piece of advice, definitely do not bother with sounds. Just yeah, it's just not worth the extra time. Do an extra piece. Spend some more time polishing your visuals. That's what you're getting hired for. That's what is going to make more difference. Have that on the portfolio. So. Okay, overall impressions, good. There's some really nice work here. I'm just going to let it play while we talk over it. The presentation and the way kind of the work has been shown here, I think overall is good. You've used some nice environments. We'll get more onto that later on. What I would say is there's a little bit of inconsistency. Firstly, the whole sort of portfolio is about 2 minutes long. I'd probably recommend trying to cut that down to to 1 minute. A little bit of editing that sort of feels, and maybe this is a little bit unfair, but it sort of feels like it's here's all of the work that I've done, here's the development work, here's the final polished work, here's all my kind of learning process. And again, it's that thing of, it's very difficult to feel like you've done something and then you kind of cut it and feel like it's been wasted, but actually the learning's the important part. And so there are definitely pieces in here that are weaker than others, and a little bit of self-editing. By including all the work you've ever done, what you're kind of showing is that you're not experienced enough to self-edit down to the really good stuff. Now that's a little bit unfortunate, or a little bit unfair, because what we're seeing here is all very much kind of video game quality effects. None of these things would look out of place in a game, but the work you need to do for your portfolio is different from the work you need to do once you have the job. And so what we need from the portfolio is a little bit more kind of almost flashiness. Although there's really good work here, nothing really stands out and impresses me as like, oh wow, actually that's really smart, that's really nicely done, that's really clever. There's a lot of really kind of good work, but nothing really kind of outstanding, if that makes sense. Cool, a couple more sort of big picture things about presentation. Characters. Now these have the chest inscription here, MFX, but they're just a really simple mannequin. Personally, I assume this MFX comes from your initials, Mateus, Ferreira, and then FX. Kind of cool. I can't comment too much. I'm wearing a shirt with my own face on it because it's branding and what have you. So I understand the reason behind all this kind of stuff. But at the same time, how much time have you put into that? Same as with the idea of the audio. You spent some time getting this model, you spent some time rigging it. Maybe it was all done, maybe it's all pre-canned things, but there is potentially sort of more harm than good being done by this. So in the fantasy environment, maybe it's okay, but when we get to the more sort of modern realistic environments, maybe especially the sci-fi one, there's one here, this character, or this whole shot, what you're trying to show with this shot is actually the scanner effect and the post-process that's happening. But the most important and interesting thing that's happening in here is this character on the floor, but he doesn't really fit with the environment. He's a naked dude with like no shoes on. To me it doesn't kind of mesh well, and it's almost becomes distracting. Default mannequin, either the Manny or Quinn, which is the name of the male and female mannequins from Unreal, they're so ubiquitous that you can just use them. Like, they don't look out of place in a fantasy scene, even though they're sci-fi robot kind of mannequins, just because they've been used so much and so frequently. So putting time into making sure that you've got a character that fits, again, almost distracts or detracts from the amount of time you spent polishing your effects. So it's the same idea here, but by having this kind of text across the chest, I think you're actually kind of distracting. You've made it not the default, and therefore it becomes something that attracts attention, and that detracts from the attention elsewhere. Again, this might just be a personal thing, but considering the amount of work that you've put into it, is it necessary to do that? And there's things like his hands are penetrating the floor, and like there's some sliding happening in the animation. Now, that's not the thing that you want to be showing here. You want to be showing a cool effect, but there's nothing stopping you putting this cool effect on an environmental piece, something that isn't a human character, and that will maybe kind of present it better. Cool. Same with animations. Some of these animations, I feel like they're all kind of pre-canned animations that you've acquired from the marketplace, which is great, but the amount of animation and time, yeah, see, that one really doesn't work for me. When he steps forward with his shield, it looks so out of place, this sci-fi environment, and you've got this sort of mold lines and feet, and yeah, not really a fan. But yeah, same with the animations. Like, don't spend a lot of time putting animations into things, doing hand animation, unless you want to be an animator. I feel like the tank one, where's the tank shot? Here. Well, a lot of these animations could be sort of downloaded from the marketplace, fine. Something like this, maybe that is just sort of pointing forwards, but if you spent time doing that yourself, here as well, the animation just kind of clicks at the end of its lifetime, and so there's a real kind of jarring jolt to that I don't think, that I think is detracting from the scene, because the animation is there. So it is a tricky thing. You don't want to just do all of your effects in isolation without environments and without characters, but also don't want to spend too long on them either. So cool. All right. Last thing I want to say, sort of as a sort of general point, there isn't really a strong sense of narrative or sense of cohesion to the portfolio. There's a lot of pieces, some of them really good, some of them need some polish, but it starts fantasy, goes through some spells, jumps to some realistic modern, with some muzzle flashes and bullet impacts, something a bit longer, grenades, then we go sci-fi with this portal. This again is sort of a stylized sci-fi realistic type thing. Then we end up back in sort of fantasy land, then some environments without characters, but again sort of sci-fi. There's a real kind of jumping around. So my advice would be to sort of bring those things together. So make sure that you're having your sort of fantasy effects all together, your sci-fi effects all together. Just gives you a little bit more sense of cohesion and almost a sort of sense of storytelling. So start with the bigger effects and then maybe some of the smaller things. I mean which one is it? Yeah, the steam here. Something like steam in a sci-fi corridor, in itself, it's not worth whatever we are, 5 seconds, 3 seconds even, of the portfolio. Personally, it's a fine effect. It's exactly what you'd see in a video game, but it doesn't demonstrate anything particularly impressive here. I mean, I'd argue that maybe you need some more effect here, something to bridge that gap. Maybe some sort of cone, and we'll get to the sort of step-by-step bit. But having something like this as a background element in another scene, you can kind of bring together different things. And so, for example, the sparks in the scene could be in the same shot, and you'd have the same amount of screen time, but you'd have something more interesting. At the moment, it feels like it cuts a lot. I think there were how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, I think ish, different shots in the portfolio, and that just kind of feels like a lot. It feels like you're always jumping to the next thing and never really giving yourself time to look at and sort of settle on what impressive work is there to be seen. Okay, I think that's it for my kind of overall notes. Again, obviously, my opinion. A lot of that can be applied to anyone's portfolio, not specific to this one. But just sort of thinking about, you kind of have to think about how you're presenting your work as a whole separate thing from how you've made the work. And so, something I'm quite hot on, making sure that the work sort of presents itself well. So jumping into sort of scene by scene, we'll start with this one. It's at the start. First thing I would say, there's some weird camera choice. You've presented the camera here with these little bits of silhouette. They don't look intentional, they look like a mistake. If you had your camera behind an object and the whole kind of thing was a little bit silhouetted, that would be intentional and that might look interesting. But at the moment, just having these kind of little elements poking into frame here silhouetted don't really work. And you are being judged not on the things you've made. I mean, what happens here in the screen could be really, really cool, but if you've shown a lack of attention to detail in things like this, I personally think that kind of gets picked up on in a portfolio. It's the sort of overall impression rather than the kind of specific of what you're showing. But yeah, things like that. Similarly, lighting. If you're going to use these sort of pre-made environments, at the moment there's a lot of lighting happening here and here at the background. The eye's being drawn there. The eye's automatically drawn to areas of high contrast, and changes in colour and things like that. And so to me, these are the sort of the visual hotspots. But actually, this is the character we want. And there's a little bit of light on him. And so just kind of using the environment. It's very good to use an environment. This isn't just a grey sort of box grid environment. So I mean that's really good. But if you are using an environment, you then have to sort of also think about what you're doing with it. Are these pieces down here? I mean, it's a bit unfair in that if you haven't made this, you kind of aren't going to have like necessarily control of how high quality the environment you're working with is, but you do have a choice about how it's displayed. So do these little rocks here add to the scene or detract from it? I mean, I think they're a little bit distracting, so maybe I'd kind of just cut them entirely, or if you're going to have them, include them in the effect. And so there's a burst happens here, and energy gets fired out from the floor. Maybe all these rocks fly off, and then there's sort of a reason to have them there. And so kind of taking the idea of what the effect is doing, using the scene, bringing that together. The foliage, does it move when the energy burst happens? We've got lots of lines of force effectively. If it affects the plants and it affects the rocks, that kind of sells the effect a little bit more. And yeah, there's a flash of light, but the scene itself remains quite static. So again, if you're having a scene, I think it makes sense to use that. So we are maybe not going to frame by frame this. There's a few bits we have. I've already frame by framed it and looked at parts of it. So we're not going to be here forever. But yeah, I'm going to go through and look and sort of highlight some of these things that work and don't work. So can I? No, that's changing the speed. No, I'm fine. Okay. So as for the effect itself, I don't think it's the strongest effect in the portfolio. You want to start with the best work, so probably this would be somewhere sort of middle. But there's a few things that are quite nice about it. Secondary elements, so this sort of lightning strike happens. I'd probably expect to see the sword glowing at this point. The energy's been transferred. There's a glow in the eyes that I quite like. It's not just the sort of isolated to the sword, but the effect, sort of this lightning as it comes round. If you've imparted energy into the sword, then I want to sort of see that represented. I think maybe it's glowing when it's behind your head. I said I wasn't going to frame by frame it, but it's hard to do anything else. Yeah, so this is glowing at this point, but that's almost too late. Like, this impact happens, lightning's very fast. This flash should also be represented as kind of glowing into the sword, in my opinion. I'd probably just go big with this. You've got lightning hitting the sword, have kind of arcs that come down. At this point here, there's not much happening around the character. Yeah, there's a lightning trail, but we're not seeing anything because the body's hiding it. There's nothing stopping us kind of getting lightning flashes and all of this kind of really fast, energetic stuff happening. Yeah, again, at this point, there's very little visible. The sword's now become sort of face onto camera, but this should be glowing. There should be sparks here, maybe a kind of an effect aura around him. The gameplay sort of story of this is that you're hitting the ground and then the characters over here are bursting and dying, but that really isn't being kind of conveyed. The amount of energy you need to transfer across the room, that's more like it. Huge amount of energy. Careful with chromatic aberration. There's a few times that this gets used in this portfolio. A little bit goes a long way. Here you're getting just multiple images. I'm not a huge fan of lots of chromatic aberration. Again, a few pixels can really kind of sell a burst or an impact. Seeing the image 3 times, I think is a bit much. So, last thing on this, so I don't want to stay too long on this one effect, but the characters that are dying, all this energy, and then they just kind of puff and just disappear. They absolutely explode. Loads of energy, loads more. Really, for a first piece in a portfolio, you really want to kind of sort of hit the ground running, really wow people. And so much more energy into the sword, much more energy around the character now as an aura, maybe even a few kind of starting little bits on the target characters, and then boom, really blow these guys up. Sparks, lightning, trails from this point to these points, and not this little kind of like background poof, they just kind of disappear. Cool. Quite a lot about this first piece. There is a lot to like about it. There's a lot of nice ideas going on. It just really needs that extra level of kind of like pushing things. For being the first piece that you've decided to include in the portfolio, I think you really want to make sure that it's strong, make sure it's working for you, and there aren't these kind of like, I don't know, areas where it could be polished. Last thing, ground decal, nice. It's a bit too dark for me, a bit too again, sort of disconnected from the energy that was there before. But there's just visual errors in it as well. So I mean, this rock is not necessarily doing you any favors. It's showing up the fact that the decal isn't presented correctly, or isn't working correctly. It's exactly the kind of thing you see in video games all the time. But video games don't have as much control as we do with a portfolio piece, and so even if you just move that rock over here so it's less affected, that's gonna kind of make that error go away. I'm a bit of a stickler for these kinds of things, but you are being judged on everything you've chosen to present, and if you've chosen to present a rock that doesn't receive a decal properly, either you need to fix that, or you're showing either you don't know how to fix it, or you show that you don't have the sort of artistic eye to notice that it's breaking like that, whereas it's very, very easy to just not have that error in a controlled environment like a portfolio. Cool. Moving on. Second piece, much better. Immediately, the lighting's working. There maybe could be little flames in here, something like that. There's definitely a light source, but the presentation of the environment works a lot better. The presentation of the camera works a lot better. Here we do have a foreground element, but it's sort of an intentional foreground element rather than those kind of silhouettes that were sticking in last time. So I immediately think this whole scene works a lot better. Effect-wise, I really like it. There's some cool things to that. You've got a build-up, you've got a draw, the animation's working, the distortion and chromatic aberration isn't too strong. I'll pause it now and see whether that's true, but doesn't look like there's any chromatic aberration, but there's a little bit of distortion to that. There's some nice technical control. Having these rings sort of equally spaced along the line works quite nicely. This distortion happening there. The camera shakes maybe a bit much if I was being more kind of critical with this. The camera shake feels a little bit less like a slow wobble rather than the quick kind of vibration, but overall pretty good. Yeah, it works. Maybe there should be some lighting. Again, video games might not be able to afford a light, but for portfolio work we can just put a light here, have a fully dynamic light, having light being picked up on all these edges, really kind of showing the effect. Modern hardware is getting pretty good. For portfolio work, you always kind of want to think in terms of a cinematic, and so make sure that the presentation and make sure that the quality is at that level where you're not worrying about performance. At least in my opinion. Again, it shows, well, it's much easier to take a expensive effect and polish it or optimize it back to gameplay quality than it is to take an effect and up sort of scale. You need to show that you can do the really good impressive stuff, and then you can kind of work back to the optimized stuff. Cool. Slightly weaker effect again here, I think. In terms of camera angle, fine. Yeah, again, we're being a bit more intentional here. We've got all these pots lying around. We've got a huge burst of effect here. These pots do not move in the slightest. Personally, again, if you're going to include it, do something with them. Smash them, blow them out, move them with physics, that kind of thing. The quality and the sort of the overall impression I get for something like this, I don't know. Personally, here, I mean, these are quite good sort of as a pair to analyse. Here, everything's kind of working together. The shapes, the colours, the energy is being drawn in and then kind of like explodes outwards. So it's very common or very kind of understandable visual language as you're kind of bringing in this stuff from the environment and then firing it out. I mean, it's Ryu's fireball. It's so many kind of effects where you've got this drawing in of energy and then bursting it outwards. Here, same idea, but the drawing in of energy is just a few lines. Doesn't necessarily kind of work as strong as the curves in that first piece. And then this burst, it's a huge burst, so this is much more internalized energy. A lot of the energy must be coming from within because it's not coming from the environment, but when it does burst outwards, there's a sort of radial starburst, this ring on the ground, and then this ring that comes up. Is this energy from heaven? Is this energy from above? Is this I mean, it says a buff, so I mean you're getting stronger, but in terms of sort of the shape language and the movement language, I think it's just a bit confused. There's a lot happening, but it's not working together. And then afterwards, again, you've got this sort of radial burst coming outwards and this smoke coming off you, and this marker on the floor. There's just a lot of elements, and the more elements you have, the harder they have to, or the more difficult it is to make them sort of all work together. Whereas here, I think the elements do work together. So the energy being drawn in and then bursting outwards. Here, it just feels quite a lot. There's like stuff happening because it's happening. It's not necessarily intentional. Like, what does this ring mean? What does it do? It's not necessarily showing what the effect is doing. It doesn't communicate. It doesn't explain to the player what's happening. Something like a rune on the floor. Either that's something that's there first, at least again in my opinion, like the rune is either there at the start as part of the build-up of the effect and then kind of bursts away, or it's something that gets drawn on the floor. Maybe you get a buff inside this area, but then that doesn't make sense. If that's just a small rune, that would have to be a bigger rune on the floor, and so it's these kinds of questions I'm asking myself of like, why does that work? Here, same idea, rune on the floor, but here it makes sense because it's sort of a circle of protection or a kind of warding. It's part of this effect, whereas in this case, oops, if we go back to here, it just feels like, oh yeah, you put a rune on the floor. Yeah, cool. All right, fine. Why? What does it do? Cool. Moving on to this next effect. Element wise, it's quite nice. This is a nice soft glow. You've got a bit more of a build up around here. It does feel maybe like this is quite flat. It might be nice to have a similar circle just on the inside, so that this glowing effect feels like it's got a bit more three-dimensionality to it. If you think about it in sort of sections, so that's the floor and that's the plane going up, so effectively that bit there. You can have the same material on all three of these faces, and then when you view this from different angles, it's going to look much more 3D, and so this glow, rather than being just perfectly up, would have a bit more three-dimensionality to it. May work better, may be quite nice as a sort of cylinder, I don't know, something to explore. One thing I would say about this effect, and this is kind of true of all of the fantasy stuff, it's very monochromatic. Colour-wise, there's this green glow to it. It says it's cursed. Well, green could be evil. Green can also be healing. Can also be kind of anything in between. Like, by having just a solid colour to this, you're not necessarily giving yourself as much visual interest or communicating as much to the player. There are areas where it kind of blooms out, or kind of like gets this solid colour that isn't bursting, isn't blooming. So there's some transparency to this, but this is sort of opaque. I'd expect maybe the same thing elsewhere here. So these runes, maybe little elements where there's kind of some noise that travels through the effect that has this sort of stronger glow to it. There's so much brightness and energy happening here that it isn't being represented elsewhere in here. Maybe the sword itself has a kind of a shader and a Fresnel really bright into the ground. In terms of floor, I mean, this again is a decal, but like you can kind of see how this isn't really presented across the floor properly. That should come round and then down and then present here. Now this is quite a tricky thing to do potentially, but the unevenness of the floor is taking away from the what the aura is doing. So cool. Just way over time, it's fine. This is going to be a long video, but that's not a problem. Cool. Yeah, focal points, where the eye is being drawn. Again, brightest area of highest contrast. Probably wants to be here. This is the most important part of this effect. It's the center. It's a radial effect. It's not. It's here. And so maybe toning down the brightness there, increasing the brightness there, that kind of thing. With all of these sort of comments and critiques, they are sort of polished parts, things to be doing. Like overall, the main effect is there. The selling of the effect, all of that stuff is kind of these are, how am I saying this? These are quite well developed effects. I think it's this little bit of polish that will really kind of push them. that a little bit further. This guy, yeah, you've used some effect or used some technique here to hide the inner triangles. That's fine. I don't think it really necessarily is worthy of a portfolio piece though. If there was more to this, if he had some kind of more of a flamey aura, there was some more visual interesting things happening here. As it is, it's a Fresnel shader that you've used another kind of custom depth to hide the triangles, and that's cool. But maybe these characters, where are we? Maybe these characters here could be those shader, and so by combining that together, you're making a bit more visual interest into this scene. Maybe it's something where the curse of this of the sword is kind of affecting these characters, so maybe this part of the body, the legs that are closer to it, uses that translucent shader, and then maybe there's some well positioned offsets, so they're being pulled in, and you've got some kind of magic portally effect and that kind of thing. I don't know, but you could do more with one scene, and then you wouldn't need to include the other one, and you're still showing off the same technical skill, but you're kind of building more on onto one piece. Cool. Because yeah, I mean, fine, cool, you understand how a technique works, but it doesn't really show me much more than that. Blood splat, fine. Yeah, I mean, it works. It's quite nice. There's some nice elements to it in terms of the motion. You've got some follow through to the sword. The maybe the blood should start a frame earlier. It's a bit unfair doing this kind of frame by frame, but at the same time, it should really. You'll get more of an impact by having it timed correctly. But there's some nice directionality to it coming this way. There's some nice follow through from the arc of the sword. Maybe feels like it should be more of a decapitation, the amount of energy that's coming there, but that's a lot harder to do. So as a piece though, again, it's maybe a little bit small on its own. One of the sort of overarching themes I think with this portfolio is I'd like to see fewer pieces but more polish and more kind of thought and more kind of cinematic elements to them. So taking those kind of first fantasy effects and really kind of bringing them together into more of a kind of like impressive presentation piece, if that makes sense. Cool. Moving on to the muzzle flash. This works. Again, functionality wise, you've got all the elements there. There's some nice read to it in terms of the impact. The actual flash itself is very, very quick, which muzzle flashes should be. It's a little repetitive. That would be my point of feedback here. We've got 3 shots, and each time the actual muzzle flash itself is very similarly shaped. Yeah, that could even be quicker, you know. By having this, looks like it's a single sprite. The way it kind of moves and all fades together makes me think that's a single sprite, but this could be a separate sprite, this could be a separate sprite, this could be a separate sprite. When they happen, they'll have different lifetimes, different timings, different intensities. This obviously would then be a separate sprite as well. They could then be different flipbooks or sprite sheets. So if you have, I don't know, a texture that's divided into 8 and each one has a different flame shape on it, you're really going to help break up that repetition. Now, if something like a muzzle flash, you've presented it firing 3 times, great, but you're going to see that so many times in a video game when you're playing, and so having this level of variation and variance is so important. Okay, so there's 5 of them, but they're all pretty similar. I'd really like to see some variation to that. When you're dealing with these kinds of effects as well, it's always a good idea, show it in single burst and then show it in full auto. use the same components, so the same textures and smokes and particles, but rather than having it as a single burst effect, show it as a looping effect. So how does that change? A looping effect, or a fully auto firing in a video game, generally you can't just play the same thing over and over again. You want a few more, there's more smoke particles, more overdraw, more expense in a single shot, because you know there's a reload time for that to clear from the screen. Whereas a firing repeatedly, if you just play the same thing but really fast, you'll get really bad performance. And so there's an entirely different way of thinking about whether it's a sort of a fully automatic muzzle repeating fire. And again, you can do some nice elements of variation to that. So things that are going to get bigger over time, things get smaller. Maybe you get some slight glow on the muzzle as it heats up, that kind of thing. I think actually, if I frame by frame to a shot, you probably do want to have a yeah. So if this is all here, like something, maybe a hot spot, just a sort of simple circular sprite that fires. It's tricky. You can study muzzle flashes. They are quite tricky things to study, because they don't always get picked up by cameras, because the frame rate is so high, or the effect is so quick, it doesn't get picked up by the frame rate of the camera. That muzzle flash, or that camera shake here works a lot better compared to the one in the magic effect. It's just much quicker, much more responsive. Cool. Not sure what it is, but I'm not really a fan of this piece at all. Maybe a bit unfair. The jet flying past, great, cool. I'd maybe want to see some contrails or something. I think it's the sky. The sky's so bright, it's really hard to read what you're trying to show here, and maybe that's realistic, but these things just appear full size. It's quite sudden bursts, and then they get just lost straight away into the environment. If this was a blue sky, or I mean, that distortion bubble's really, really heavy. I mean, I guess these are sort of anamorphic lens flares, but again, I can't really see anything up here. Once the end of the shot's sort of happened, we've got these jets flared down, but the smoke itself is a little popcorny, by which I mean you can see kind of individual sprites. Doesn't look like a smoke trail necessarily. It's a tricky thing to do, again, thinking about performance, but I would treat this as a cinematic. I would treat this as being maybe pre-rendered, so I'm not going to worry about optimizing it to make it run in kind of real time for a game. That's a different issue. It's so difficult with performance because you don't know what the target hardware is. If this is a VR game, well, this might be acceptable. If this is a mobile game, this might be acceptable. If this is the latest hardware, the latest AAA engine, this is probably not acceptable. You can probably get away with more sprites than this. You can probably get away with more overdraw, more performance, because we're targeting that really high end hardware. So, as I say, portfolio wise, I would always treat it a little bit more like a cinematic. Bullet impacts, same thing as we said before with muzzle flashes. Do a single one, or in fact, probably for bullet impacts, I would probably always do 3 examples. So a small bullet, so like a pistol, 9mm, something like that. A large rifle shot, so big burst impact, small burst impact. They're going to react differently. You're going to have different energies, different amounts of debris coming off. It can all be the same component parts, but you're going to get 3 times as much work for the same amount of work as it went. You do it once, you may as well then do it 3 times. Make those small changes, and then a fully auto, so a looping effect that you sort of turn on and move across the concrete will give you a different effect to that sort of single burst fire from a rifle. Cool. You've displayed 3 surfaces here. Personally, this bullet impact looks maybe a little bit more metal-like. Concrete doesn't necessarily get such a defined shape. I mean, I'm a bit of a stickler here because it's the kind of thing that I've done so many times. But the concrete would sort of sprawl out, and you'd have a break into a normal map impact dent, but not this well-rounded, well-defined shape necessarily. So some larger elements, some smaller elements. That's how concrete would react. The dust and debris coming out works fine, no problem with that. Maybe a little bit heavy on the gravity, but then here is this painted metal, maybe, and then you'd probably get the effect that you're getting here, but way less dust. Dust. I mean, concrete is made of concrete is going to sort of vaporize and powder when you shoot it. Metal, not so much. You're going to get a hot spot, and so you'd get a frame or two of a glowing circle that then kind of disappears. You'd get sparks, way more sparks, more directionality to the sparks. These little dots don't really work. They want to be like longer and thinner. But where's the dust coming from? Why would there be dust on a from metal being shot? So really look at your reference. Wood, somewhere in the middle, but the shape of the bullet impact on wood, again, it's really not going to be this well-defined circle. So and again, sparks. Why is it sparking? What is there that creates a spark when you shoot wood? Probably wouldn't happen. So just as a sort of overall, the motion and timing of these kind of works quite nicely, but just sort of thinking about what you're showing, component parts. Yeah, these sparks, especially on the middle one here, there's two sets of sparks happening, really aggressive, long, thin impact sparks, and then tiny little dots. How does this happen? Where does the energy come from? How do you get something so long and thin and something so small? Thinking about sort of the material science of it. I appreciate, as a VFX artist, you kind of need to be an expert in absolutely everything, but if this is a metal surface with a painted surface on top, are these little bits of paint that have flecked off? Maybe if they die very, very quickly, they were worth having as a little kind of effect, but this is a huge spark burst for that central sort of impact, and then these two things kind of don't read like they're coming from the same position or from the same sort of physical reaction. Cool. This effect I like, this helicopter. It's got a bit more to it. It's not just a sort of simple study. There's a whole element to this. There is unfortunately some sort order issues there. Now, again, you're working with an engine, the engine isn't flawless, there are times when this will happen, but if you've chosen to leave that there and put that in your presentation as your portfolio work, unfortunately the person who's looking at it, again, has two conclusions that can be drawn. Either you didn't notice it, in which case you need to work on your kind of artistic kind of self-review process, or you don't know how to fix it, in which case you need to work on your technical skills. So it is a simple fix. You can adjust the sort order, change blend modes, potentially even just make the glass into an opaque surface with a reflection, like a cube map or something. Do we need to see inside this? Does it actually show us anything at any point? Not really. It's going to fix that error straight away, and so just, yeah, okay, maybe there's a tiny bit of transparency and dust behind the thing there that works quite nicely, but yeah, if this was just sort of a solid thing, that would be different. But again, important thing here is you need to notice it, you need to fix it. How you fix that is kind of up to you. Quite like to see more secondary elements to this. This is a very dusty environment. There'd be little rocks would be moving. You can create more of this sort of rotation type movement in some of these things here. Same branches having there'll be a well positioned offset shader on this. This is from Marketplace Pack, I believe, but just adding a bit to that. So if you ever look at a helicopter landing, there's so much energy and so much force pushing things around, you'd really get some movement up in the sky, and it creates that little bit more storytelling and development over the course of the shot. I mean, it's only 10 seconds, whatever it is, but if everything's moving very fast up here, and then as this kind of comes to land, and then maybe the rotor blades slow down, you can push that a little bit further, and then you can start fading out your dust and your movement in your trees. So taking what you have and sort of adding a bit more. All of these plants, they'd be absolutely blowing all over the place with this rotor blade moving like that. This one, unfortunately, I think is a little bit weaker. There's a rigid body simulation happening here. It's the only one in the portfolio. It's nice to try and learn from, but realistically you need to spend a lot of time learning how to do rigid bodies if you're going to get them to sort of portfolio level. Some of these spinners are just spinning away for crazy. If the impact of this is from this shot, most of the debris is going to go that way, away from us, not forwards. So that in itself doesn't necessarily make any sense. We have such an intuitive understanding of physics, and then things like this that we've seen millions of times in movies, that as soon as it starts being a little bit different, a little bit wrong, then it kind of doesn't make any sense, and we can feel that even if you can't necessarily articulate why or what about it doesn't work. And I think unfortunately the effect itself, the explosion, works, it's fine. There's some nice glowing elements and nice sort of fade out to the fog, and just saying that, and then I've just noticed something I don't like. These smoke trails, you see them again popcorning, the way that the movement happens. Each of these sprites starts moving in different directions, and you can start seeing the fade out. It doesn't really work realistically, but for me, yeah, these physics pieces are just so inaccurate, or are so unrealistic about how they move, these kind of pirouetting bits of concrete. So unfortunately I think that probably isn't worth the work to make it good. If you want to include a muzzle flash or a tank muzzle flash and an explosion, great, that's fine. But for something like rigid bodies, or even anything, if you've just like any topic that you started to sort of experiment with, great, do experimentation, maybe have it as like a sketchbook piece in your art, on your art station or on your portfolio, but it's not final finished polished quality, if I can get my words out. And so I think unfortunately that's sort of, yeah, just a bit distracting. This works. There's kind of some nice elements to that. Color wise, I think again it could be a bit more color depth. Here it's kind of all the same smoke elements. Lighting on smoke is really hard, but you can fake a lot of it. So if this bursts out in different emitters, this smoke could be darker, and you can kind of like pick where the light source is and make it work for you. We go back. There's a nice element to it where it sort of bursts out in different directions first. That's maybe a bit strong. If we're going for realism, why is there such a huge flash of light? But these trails that come out first, well, they happen quick enough that they kind of hide their shape, but there's some different elements to this that I think work quite nicely. If you did want to polish this, if you look at smoke grenades, they burst out, but then they keep going, and so this could be kind of moving and spinning. It's quite a lot more work for not much benefit. One thing to maybe note as well, it looks quite 2D and flat on this surface. You'd probably want to have some ground elements, so flat planes facing upwards, and so effectively you'd get a bit more of this kind of shape, or just a bit more volume. So if the velocity on these sprites comes towards the camera a bit more, then by the time you get to here, this element is going to be, or this part of the concrete is going to be affected by the smoke. So I mean, that distance is how far around the character has been affected. You probably want a similar distance in front of the character to be affected to make this feel like a volume and three-dimensional. It fades out quite nicely. Much better. Character gives us a little bit of context. Somehow this street is being blown up, but smoke trail from the rocket is much less popcorny. We don't see individual sprites really. They're a bit faster, which is fine. There's a little bit of decal and debris, but it's working. There's no errors to that. The shape of the explosion works quite nicely. One thing I would say with a lot of these, if you've done these simulations yourself, so I assume these are kind of Embergen or fluid simulations, it might be worth having them on screen. It's a nice thing Jason Keyser has done in some of his YouTube breakdowns, but like you sort of show the textures as a thing up here where they're kind of a little bit out of shot. Maybe just take the side and you can kind of show both the work and the what's the word, the sort of the technical work behind it as well at the same time, or that can be a separate piece, separate page in your portfolio, that kind of thing. Just sticking with the explosion, nice little bit of chromatic aberration. You're not getting huge double images. Very bright explosion, which is nice. So works quite nicely. This would potentially cause, well, you'd probably want a crater. Ideally, I mean, it is quite a lot more work, but actually this amount of explosion on this kind of surface would then create a an indent and then sort of cracks coming around, that kind of thing. Maybe it's too much work for what's happening, but if you were to sort of put some time into polishing this, that would be quite nice. Again, secondary elements, this car, just give it some physics, blow it up. Maybe these crack, I don't know. The leaves in the trees all respond with some extra movement, stuff like that. Little secondary elements. You don't necessarily read them on first watch, but after multiple watches, which, trust me, whoever's looking at your portfolio and thinking about hiring you will be doing, those little extra details add a nice element to it and kind of give you a nice kind of breakdown. Okay. Pretty decent portal. This character's moving outwards, and so I would maybe have these lines moving outwards, just a simple swap of your panna texture, just to create a bit more cohesion to the overall shot. Again, thinking about the sort of the cinematic quality of what you're doing. If everything's going in, something should go into the portal. If everything's coming out, it should come out of the portal. And so as the character walks through, obviously you get that kind of half shadow on them. Just try and, I want to go back and then just try and pause it at the right time. Here we go. So this looks to me like the character shader is reading the portal, but the portal's not reading the character shader, and so maybe some elements where the intersection happens, some ripples, that kind of thing, could break up this element and push it a bit further forwards. This black is very, very black. Maybe that's fine, but having a little bit of something in there, I don't know, some stars or some lines, a little glow, something like that, so that it doesn't just come out of nothing. But there's some nice elements to this. I like the little sparking lightning flashes that happen. Just play it through again. Yeah. Cool. We discussed this one before. Again, the thing that you're showing off here should be the effect, and then where I get attracted to, or my eye gets drawn to, is this character. If this was an animation portfolio, then maybe the animation, we could discuss it, but yeah, I think as a sort of technical thing of just, okay, I've put a post-process on here, you don't need to have this effect or this scene to show it, so it's maybe gone a bit far the other way. This is one of Epic's demo levels, the Soul City, I think. it does come with some rain effects, so I'm not sure whether you've made the rain or whether that's just using what's already from the marketplace pack. But if you're going to have a rainy scene, I would really put the time into making sure that rainy scene works. And so some splashes, maybe little bits where there's more drips. If you're going to do it full. Again, sort of saying what I said earlier. Take the time to really take a piece, polish it, push it a long way, rather than, I mean, what was that? There's something happening in there in the background, something falling. Is it like a random one-off leaf? Yeah, what are these? Why are there little leaves falling in the background? If that's from the marketplace pack, again, just kill them. Don't have them there. They're not adding anything. Bit distracting. Kind of brings up a good point though. I've watched this portfolio, I don't know, 15, 20, 30 times in preparing and going through this. That's the first time I've noticed those. So your own work is incredibly hard to notice what things are happening because your eyes get so used to what's there. So do try and think how you can kind of bring that into your work. Now that I've seen them, I can't unsee them. It's really, really bizarre. But when you are working on a portfolio, make sure that you're looking at it as a video and not in Engine. It's very, very easy to get distracted by what's happening in Engine. So render it out at the end of the day. Next day, first thing to do, watch the video, frame by frame it, go through, really find those errors. Ask online, ask your friends, family, colleagues, get some feedback, get some other eyes on it, and then hopefully little things like this that are really low-hanging fruit. I mean, literally select the emitter, delete, get rid of that error, but it all adds up to sort of the overall quality polish of what's happening. Cool. This effect's alright. Obviously it's inspired by the recent finals. What works so nicely in that game is the movement of the character being inherited by the coins. So just having a character stand here and get hit and just fall, it's fine, but there's so much more that could have happened. If, again, we're not getting into doing animation, but if this character was jumping through the air, Max Payne style, those coins are going to get kind of inherit that velocity. Much nicer effect. Just spawning coins in a volume, it doesn't necessarily, to me at least, like it's not that difficult to do technically wise, and artistically you're just standing there and spawning them. They're not that exciting either. So not sure what's happening with the first few frames. This energy pistol fires, cool, fine, not going to worry too much about that, but this volume is missing its coins until a few frames in, and again, I'm going through frame by frame. It's a bit unfair, it's not what happens in a video game, but once you've noticed that, well, maybe you don't see it, but maybe it's quick enough, but then maybe you don't need that little initial dissolve. So just thinking about the timing of your elements, and making sure that they are all working together. There's one particular coin that lands right at the end that really annoys me, because it lands completely bright and becomes one of the brightest things on that floor. So thinking again about, I mean, really unfair because it's totally random. Probably this is a random effect, but if the recording that you use on your portfolio has something like this that's attracting attention unwantedly, then I wouldn't use that recording. I'd just record it again. Yeah. This effect's cool. I really like the little lines that fire off. That's a really nice touch. It'd be very easy just to have this as a material that scanned from or kind of transitioned from one material to the opaque to the translucent, but there's these lines that fire out as he's sort of dissolving that I think work really, really well actually. And then colour wise, you've got this red lighting, blue here, it all kind of just works together, and then obviously the translucent effect afterwards. It's not completely see-through, it's got this distortion to it. Thinking from sort of gameplay and playability wise, we can totally understand this guy can't be seen by this guy, even though we can obviously completely make him out. So I might tone that down a little bit, maybe keep it this strength first, and then over time, after the transition happens, just sort of try and blend him away a little bit more, kind of push it a bit further. I like the blue light kind of as well, nice touch. I mean, yeah, I kind of alternate between nice things, ones I like, ones that don't work so well. This shield effect, it's fine, like it does a thing, I don't know. There's some nice elements, but the shield obviously reacts when it gets hit, changing colour, changing brightness. Maybe that's just the lighting, but there's something more you could do with this. So you could have a ripple, you could have distortion. In terms of just the idea of it, it seems like it's a small shield, it's only protecting his sort of chest and head, but something like this in kind of a laser gun scenario, I mean, if I was protecting myself, I'd want a big shield. Then there's more elements to it. You could have, I don't know, the outline appearing first, and then it kind of fills in, and some distortion, some waves, some more to it. I don't know, something this kind of size is quite often used as like a parrying buckler, and so you'd have kind of a sword and shield, and then use that to create kind of openings in the enemy's sword swings and that kind of stuff. But for a 3D or a laser gun type environment, doesn't necessarily make sense. I don't know, there's obviously lots of logic you could use that could justify it and things, but he just jumps into pose, stands there, hopes that the things get shot, and doesn't get shot in the leg or the foot, and his foot that's got weird toes that don't make any sense in a sci-fi environment. I don't know, to me at least, there's a lot going on here that distracts me from the thing I should be looking at, which is this effect here. And again, the brightness of the environment around you. Yeah. Warp speed, fine. It conveys the effect that you're going for, but I mean, it could be stronger. Again, it's just quite monochromatic. Something like this. This is a transition effect, so then you need a start. So you need to go from outside of warp speed into warp speed, then from warp speed out of warp speed again. How do those transitions work? It's all very well showing that you can make a cool warp speed effect, but that's only part of the value, or part of the process. If we are going at warp speed, why can we see stars in the distance? If we're going faster than light, shouldn't they be all kind of stretched as well? And it's kind of broken up. So again, an okay effect. It's fine. It doesn't necessarily impress me with your technical skill or impress me with your artistic skill. It just kind of is a thing that you've made that's cool. Yeah, you're learning how materials work. Great. I'm definitely on board with having like learning effects and learning processes, but including it in your portfolio, you really need to polish it up. Same, we've got these screens down here. Why are these screens just pure black? They could be cool. There's opportunities for cool things. You could have a nice shader that has text that appears. Maybe there's like a 3D model of a planet that spins around that you've then rendered out in wireframe to a flipbook or something like that, that then again can give us more information and more understanding of what you're doing. Maybe there's some illumination from these lights. I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot of potential in a scene like this, whereas just having one effect in it, I don't think necessarily is enough. Same idea again. Have all your studies as little studies in your portfolio as a sketchbook, say sketchbook, and then something like this where it's like, oh cool, you've made a nice water material, alright. That then doesn't need to be presented in a full 3D environment. It doesn't need to have the same level of polish. It can just be a kind of like, oh, here was a quick weekend, I did some studies, I made this thing, cool. You don't have a weird creepy guy in the corner. And again, same idea here. Obviously the same scene as before. You said creepy fog, but put fog in the first environment, and then when you do that, you've got your fog. We'll go right back to this first one here. You've got your fog environment here, and then when the impact happens there, the fog gets blown away. You've got this dust kick up, but actually if the environmental fog is quite thick, and then there's a hole that kind of slowly sort of creeps in again, or even here, all of that, like using those secondary elements rather than sort of just displaying it here on the on this environment. I'm just drawn to the character moving. It isn't a strong enough effect, or isn't intended to be a strong enough effect to be the sole piece here, so make it a background effect in another shot, if that makes sense. This smoky environment cursed sword, this would work really well for some nice fog. Okay, same idea. I mean, I'm not going to repeat myself too much, but what's happening here? Well, there's a little earthquake, and then this stuff falls down. Well, we've got a really big impact happening here. Why not have the dust fall down from that environment? I'm not saying we want to put the sword animation into this piece, but what you're showing by showing this is that you can show, I don't know, some basic understanding of materials and textures and particles, and some sort of storytelling maybe, but as the only thing in this scene, it's not quite strong enough to be a portfolio piece. Cool. These environmental pieces work quite nicely. Again, I'd like to see more in them, and more length to that. So the snow effect works quite well. You've got some secondary effects with the cables moving. If there is this much movement in the cables, there'd probably be more movement in these branches. There's an orange pole here. This might have a flag on it. We could make more with that. There's some nice snow in the air, but snow could be on the environment as well. So as the snow's blowing past, we get kind of some larger sprites. Maybe they're aligned to the terrain, that kind of thing. Same here. This is a boat or a dock, it looks like. Maybe there's some movement happening over here, but this looks like it should be water potentially. So where's the waves? Where's the splash? Where's the spray? Just a bit of rain, and then there's a lightning flash. It's fine, but it could be more. Again, where's the ripples? Is there a little puddle on here? Is there some ripples? There's maybe a little bit of something, but what's being presented isn't showing me what's sort of where the interesting things are. This feels a little weak, I'll be honest. The sparks and the glows, it's fine. Again, you're sort of bursting stuff out, but when it bursts and falls, it should collide with this. We could use depth buffer collisions or distance field collisions. They're not expensive these days. If there's a little spark, it looks like it just passes through the environment or passes through the model. But again, if it's a portfolio piece, what's the interesting thing about it? Cool, there's a few sparks. That feels like a background element to something else. Maybe this moves, maybe there's steam firing out of here. We're going to have some steam in a second. That could be combined into this piece. There's obviously pipes and cables that could have more to it. Maybe one of these panels becomes a thing that lights up. I don't know. Maybe the lights flash out and some fire happens, an explosion. I don't know. But at the moment, it just feels a little bit like included for the sake of being included. Fire's cool. Fire's incredibly difficult. I think there's some nice elements to this fire. One thing I would say, it feels a little bit slow. The size of flames you have here, this is big. You have faster movement to it, and also the barrel. The movement that comes from fire is controlled by the heat rising and the sort of the air currents. Now this is a very sort of strong cylindrical shape. It's going to be much more kind of aligned with that sort of shape. I think here what you've got is a lot of quite small swirls, whereas I think the amount of heat and sort of volume of fire that you'd have here would push these flames to be much more kind of vertical. But that said, I mean, that's kind of maybe not a minor thing, but yeah, fire can be quite tricky for sure. There's some nice movement to it. Yeah, no, I do like the fire. We talked about this already. It's just a bit lackluster. Could maybe be included in one of the other environments. if you are going to have something like this. These are obviously particles in the air, but I'd always have like a 3D cone mesh as well with an animated texture on it, so that you get that sort of connection to where the steam is coming from. At the moment it just kind of appears about here, so there's a bit of a disconnect, whereas actually the density here is going to be the highest, so if anything it should be the brightest or most opaque, and then sort of transparent out. So cool. Alright, yeah. And then this final sort of water splash. Yeah, it works. It's not got the secondary elements that it needs. So the splash effect is fine, it works. There's maybe a little bit of stamping in the effect that fires up. As in we can see the same texture multiple times. But it's so quick. And then what I'd want to see is some secondary elements, so this water being splashed, and I don't know, how do I say this? If you've done something kind of simple, or done something not to a particularly high level, it's functional, it works, it does the job, and there are some nice elements to that. There's some nice shapes to the splash as they first go in. I think the animation curves you've got on this kind of cone or crown type shape work really well, but you need to take the time to then kind of make a ripple, make a splash. This water doesn't react at all to this splash, which in video games might very much be what happens, but as a portfolio piece I'd quite like to see that. So for example, if you wanted to show those splash effects off without being able to deal with that water, if we go back to the snowy, and then where are we? This environment, we could have splashes here. Now I can understand from the context of the scene that this is like an ocean front, where water hits that, it's going to create splashes. You can use that effect and that nice splash you make to create a kind of an effect here that doesn't have the ripples and the water that you need, because we can't see that. So you're using clever camera angles to show you the stuff that you want to show, rather than just including things that obviously don't work so well. So here, or alternatively make a nice ocean shader that has some three-dimensional shapes to it, and then affect them with the impacts and the splashes. Cool. Alright, this video is getting a bit long, but I just want to go through and watch everything again. As I say, it's been quite critical, quite fine-tooth comb. I do think there's some really nice work here. You've definitely demonstrated a lot of the skills that I would expect a junior to have. It's a little unfair, but I'm very confident if you were given a job, you'd be able to do that job. Unfortunately, the ability level you need to kind of demonstrate, and the artistic side of what you need to demonstrate, as well as the technical, in order to get that job, is that little bit higher. So I think with a little bit of polish, there could be some really nice pieces here. There's definitely the start to a lot of really nice pieces, but I think overall, thinking about presentation, how we take these pieces that are kind of studies and then push them that little bit further, the extra bit of work that goes into kind of presenting the scene, doing the lighting, making it all work, beyond just that sort of the functional, I think really pays dividends when it comes to the sort of the overall impression of the effect, or of the overall impression of the portfolio. So see, really nice piece, and then just that little kind of few frames that let it down on the source order there. So my advice: bit of editing, go through, work out the best pieces, which pieces you really want to include, think about the order and the scenes that you're presenting them in, and then just kind of those little bits of polish. Where can we improve? Where can we do the low-hanging fruit? A lot of this work is done. There's a lot of really nice things here, but if you can make a small change and create a big visual impact, that's a really, really efficient use of your time. Yeah, I mean, yeah, it feels to me, and this is maybe a sort of a good thing or bad thing. It feels to me like a kind of an end of project portfolio where you're like, here's all the things I did on a game, and they all work. They all would work very well for a in-game context, but they're not necessarily, here's the best thing I can do, here's the best work that I can make, here's the reasons you should be hiring me. So I think if you go away with that mindset of like, how do I make this look the best it possibly can, how can I polish this to be really impressive, really attention grabbing, and I think the basis of a lot of that is here. It just needs that polish. So cool. Caveat again, obviously all this is my opinion. Other artists might look at this and really like stuff I don't like, or really don't like stuff I do like. So obviously it all comes down to opinion. But hopefully that has been helpful. Hopefully those of you who are watching who obviously it isn't your portfolio, you get an idea about the kind of mindset, some general advice and takeaways. I have a background, I've worked on a lot of cinematic effects, and so I do like to look for those kind of cinematic elements. But you can really, if you can show you can do really amazing high quality cinematic work, then you can do that in real time kind of gameplay type effects as well. It's just a case of bringing that back to more optimization and more gameplay focus. Obviously portfolio work, you don't have the gameplay context, so it's very difficult to say, oh, does this make sense in gameplay context? Well, so the only thing we can do is, does it look really cool? Does it look really polished? Does it work really well? Cool. All right. Huge thanks to Mateus for reaching out and letting me do this portfolio review and post it online. Hopefully they've got an awful lot out of it. Hopefully you have as well. If you'd like your portfolio to be reviewed, happy to do that. Create some nice content for the channel. Hopefully we can all learn from it. If you'd like to reach out to Mateus, and I believe they are looking for work, if you think that they would be a good fit for your studio, please do so. If you want to learn more about making game VFX, tech art, all of that kind of stuff, I've got some portfolio. I've got some courses out on Gumroad and Udemy. You can check out the links to them. There's more coming. We're going to do some more Niagara stuff in the new year, which I think will be pretty cool. Happy New Year. Hope you've all enjoyed 2023. Hope you're going to make some cool work in 2024. As always, big thanks to my patrons for supporting the channel and letting me do this. And if you want to become a patron, there is a link below as well. On that note, have a great New Year's, and we'll see you all in 2024.